I am live. I am reading Vague Vacation. It's a book by Joan Marshall Grant. It was published in 1947. It describes her journey through France with her then husband Charles. Joan was a writer of her farm memories. She was very famous for The Winged Pharaoh. But this is a description of a journey in 1946. I'm in chapter 16, Ancien Combattant. We usually found someone to talk with on the veranda after dinner, and that night it was an ancient combattant of the Kaiser's War. He wore a black suit and a high collar with a narrow black tie. His hair and flowing moustache were paper white and his eyes very clear. He quoted Churchill's "blood, tears, toil and sweat" speech to us as though we might have forgotten it. Everywhere in France we were to find these words and their speaker revered. He went on to talk of the last days before the liberation. We knew we would soon be free, he said, but there were still many who fell to the claws of the bêtes sauvages. As an old soldier, he had no quarrel when the retreating Germans destroyed bridges and other military objectives, but he said he had seen outbreaks of deliberate sadism. Women and children herded into houses and churches, which were then set on fire, that he could not forgive. They are merchants, the Germans. They are méchants, the Germans. I'm afraid the English will never be able to understand the cruelty of a race which can so easily forget its individuality in the herd. They have suffered for choosing the wrong leaders, I said. Hamburg, Bremen, Berlin. It can't have been comfortable to the German in the last 3 years. It is not only the leaders. In the last days, here the officers and NCOs took the motor transport and left the men to follow as best as they could. Some of them behaved decently, but the rest? He spread out his hands eloquently. Rape, loot, fire, madame, are not pleasant to see. We still hate. It is perhaps not wise to hate, but sometimes it is necessary. It is better to hate than to compromise. I wanted to ask whether many people in his district had collaborated, but thought it too delicate a subject. Perhaps he guessed what I was thinking. Not all the people of France behaved well, he said sadly. Many, so very many, were faithful to honor, but in the eyes of the world we are still sometimes judged only by the traitors. This was a very short chapter, and I continue chapter 17. Penicillin. We had spent the afternoon on our terrace, content as basking lizards, until it became so hot that Charles had to wear his hat. Below us, a children's party laughed in the courtyard. Jacotte's birthday, I remarked lazily. The younger Blanc child. Charles heaved himself from the rug and peered over the balustrade. Our 2 hats must have looked as though they belonged to dwarfs, but even so we were observed. Jacotte wanted us to come down to look at her new bicycle, and though Charles called back to her cheerfully, he grumbled as he reached for his trousers. Jacotte's bicycle gleamed, but she was only pushing it. Charles went to see whether he could teach her to ride, while I watched the bowls which the parents were playing on the dusty alley under the plane trees. He came back looking worried. "She can't bend that knee," he said. "The one with sticking plaster on it." "It is probably only a graze," I replied casually. "It may be all right tomorrow. Don't you remember your first bicycle?" To mind my own business has often seemed impossible, unnecessary or undesirable, and this was one of those occasions. I went in search of Madame Blanc to ask what was wrong and whether she would mind if we had a look at the knee. Madame was not in the least resentful at the interference. It is the boutons, she said. They have already persisted for 5 weeks, but they are not alarming. The word conveyed nothing to me, yet I wondered uneasily if they could be related to bucked-up boils. I had once played amateur medicine woman in lancing one of these revolting sores for a picked man on a dig in Iraq. He fainted during the process. Suppressing the association, I asked what the doctor had been doing about them. The answer was that he only consulted for more serious matter, and that in any case it was Madame's personal opinion that he had no skill with boutons. We have a tube of penicillin, I said. Maybe it might help. Madame became even more genial and sent Jacquot up to our room, where we could most easily apply the ointment. There were 5 deep ulcers, each about the size of a silver 3-penny bit, and the surrounding tissue was a dark purple red. Obviously it would be useless just to smear on the ointment. The ulcers would have to be opened. While I released the pus with a gold brooch pin burnt off with surgical spirit, Charles embarked on a highly coloured history of his own progress through similar inconveniences illustrated by old scars on his knees. Whether Jacquot was impressed is doubtful. Charles said she was, but I think she was only being polite. As well she might be, for he had pressed on her our only sugar, a packet of lump, which Jacquot was getting through at a great rate, even while I poked about with a pin. When the penicillin film was complete and the new dressing applied, there had still been no cessation either in the sound of crunching sugar or in the monotone of Charles' story. When the child rejoined her party, evidently increased in popularity and therefore in enjoyment because of the sugar, and perhaps also because it was a little grand to be such a focus of attention, we again looked down over the parapet and decided it was unlikely that even the penicillin would meet the case. "Tomorrow," said Charles, "you will have to make Madame Blanc take her to the doctor." I did not look forward to that prospect. An offer of help was no insult, but to give gratuitous and firm advice was near to one. The best thing, it seemed, was to change the subject. "I'm glad you feel that way," I said crisply, "because you need a doctor more than Jacquot. Don't think I haven't been aware that you are deafer and that you have earache." Charles at last had to agree that it would be idiotic not to consult someone, and as we had always intended to go to Switzerland for a few days, why not tomorrow instead of at the end of the week? Geneva was only 160 kilometers, and we were sure to find a competent specialist there. We sat on our terrace until after midnight. As we watched the processional of stars, the sense of urgency began to leave us. No longer need to vacillate between a sense of futility and a feeling that we were the fulcrum on which our small environment relied. We heard laughter in the distance and watched villagers returning from a dance which marked the end of the vintage. We hoped their measure was as full as ours. So that was the end of this chapter, and the next one I read another time, Whiskey and Water. Happy Boxing Day.